Hey guys, Chairman here with a bit of a new and unusual video, but I hope to do more of these in the future, and this is going to be my reaction to the most recent English online Weiss Schwarz community tier list that was done after the most recent English ban list. Now, my good friend Kevin, also known as Prologue, organizes these every season or so, and oftentimes when there's a ban list, he'll organize one of these right afterwards so we can get kind of the community's responses or feedback to that most recent ban list. Now, yeah, I think this is actually I'm really looking forward to doing videos like these. Even though it's reaction content, which is usually pretty low effort, but I think what's really cool about this is I get to talk a lot about player perception and community perception when it comes to decks and the strength of decks. Instead of just kind of going over my tier list and what I think about these decks, which honestly I'm not even a good source of information for all of these decks because I haven't played every single deck on this tier list. So if I haven't played it, I don't really want to talk about it or anything like that. But I can talk about, because I've played against basically everything on this tier list, I can talk about why I think players might think certain decks are strong or weak and what I think about that as well. And so yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this, and hopefully this kind of content is interesting for you guys, and we might do more of this in the future. So this tier list was collaborated by 100 different community members who submitted to I think it's a Google form, and then Keylua then took all that information and compiled it into a tier maker tier list. And I believe that this is ordered. I'm actually not 100% sure, but I'm just assuming it's ordered because it kind of makes sense if it's ordered. I don't know how the tiers kind of break down, but I think there's it's percentages or some kind of math behind that. So yeah, without further ado, let's talk about tier 1. So this is what the community thinks is going to be the best 3 decks going into the post-ban list BCS 24-25 season, and that's Slime in top, Overlord second, and 7th Denizens third. Now Slime on the tier list is actually written as it's X pants, which basically means it could be any climax alongside the pants climax, right? And so I've actually picked out 3 of what I think are the most popular slime combos to play alongside the 2-on Miron. So this is going to be the 1-0 Milim door combo, the 1-0 Rimuru standby combo, and the level 0 Rimuru pants combo. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to take the Miron off the tier list, and I'm going to replace it with these combos, because I actually think that the strength of the Miron deck is very largely dependent on what combo you're pairing it with. So let's start with what I think is the best combo to pair with Miron going into BCS 24-25 season, and that I think it is going to be the Milim level 1 combo. Now, I actually did not think this combo was very good before. I think this combo definitely struggles with deck speed, right? It doesn't get to iterate through a lot of your deck very easily, and also struggles with selection, which are 2 very important things on your level combo that you really would want to have. But what I do think that this card specifically in this upcoming meta is going to do very well is it's going to completely ruin a lot of decks' ability to play the game. I think some of the strongest decks in the current meta rely on level 0 back row cards to really facilitate their game plan, and I think Milim being able to target those specific cards is going to be very strong. I think a lot of the aggressive decks in the current meta are either susceptible to that kind of targeted removal, or they are just not very they're not fast enough to compare with Slime. And I think with the Milim level 1 combo, you just get such an overwhelming advantage in specific matchups that I just think it's just a huge swing. I think it's very unfair that Slime gets to do that kind of stuff. That's why I think Milim is the best combo to pair with Miron. Ooh, that's a tongue twister. Milim is the best combo to pair with Miron going into this upcoming season. I didn't think so before, but I do think so now. But I do think as well that the level 0 Rimuru combo is a close second. I think 8 pants is the kind of the safe way to go. You get a level 0 combo, that gets you a bit of deck speed, a bit of advantage. It allows you to play a climax at level 0 aggressively without losing any resources. You just convert it straight into a different card. And it allows you to play your level 1 game very, very straightforward. You just play 1-0 Yom. You can play 4 of them, and the Yoms will search your Mirrors, and then the Mirrors will get you all your advantages. So you don't really need to climax combo to get a plus when you can just rely on your Mirrors to get you plus, and the rest of your game plan to very seamlessly and straightforwardly get to your Mirrors. This deck plays very aggressively. You can just kind of slam climaxes left and right and just go for a lot of early game aggression. You also rely on the strength of the level 0s that Slime has, which Slime has an amazing level 0 game to kind of carry you through the early game. And I think this deck is very strong, is very consistent, has a very high floor, plays the kind of the Miron strategy extremely, extremely well. I think the most important thing is that Miron decks want to play aggressively and play ahead in damage. You actually want to be winning in damage, and ideally you actually want to hit your opponent to level 3 first. I don't think Slime's top end without a climax combo can consistently kill from level mid-level 2. So you really want to be hitting your opponent to level 3 first, and then playing defensively with using like the defensive counters like the Rammers counter or the Rimuru minus soul counter to make sure that your opponent can't kill you from level 2, and then close out the game with your level 3s that kill very reliably from 3 but not from 2. And the last one I think is the the standby deck, and I would actually put that in tier 2. I do not think this is even remotely close to the power level of the other 2 slime builds. I think standby is just simply too slow. I think it gives up a lot of early game aggression to get big board, but then you're already getting really big board at level 2, so winning the board at level 1 doesn't really do much for the deck. You do get a lot of extra stock, which can be nice, but you trade like hand fix for that extra stock because you're trying to standby out the cards that you. So standby is really good because you can get out your Murons earlier and you can get out like your Shuna earlier, but the standby does not actually help you get your late game pieces. Which you're kind of hoping that your Murons are going to help you get your late game pieces, but it's really nice to be able to kind of do both in a lot of the other decks, with both the door of the 1-0 mill and be able to salvage cards that you need, and also the top check add just getting you kind of good cards, and then also for the 8 pants deck, no matter what pants you're playing down, you're always being able to grab a card that you want, whether through Millum combo or through Rimuru combos. I just think this is a little weak. You're not really. You're trading advantages for something that actually doesn't really benefit the overall strategy of the deck as much. So I don't know if it's at top of tier 2. We'll sort this out later. But I do think that between the 3 builds of Slime, the best one is currently Millum, followed very closely by Rimuru Pants combo. And I do not think the standby deck is on the same level as those 2 other decks. All right, moving on. The second best deck on the tier list was Overlord. And I have kind of a controversial take on that. I think Overlord is not a very good deck. Or let me caveat this correctly. I think Overlord, the deck is very strong, but I do not think that. I think the deck has a lot of weaknesses that cannot be compensated by skill. How do I describe this? I think the deck is a very carry the player deck, and you just kind of get in the backpack of the deck. And if the deck does well, the deck does well. But if the deck does poorly, you can't compensate. You can't make it up by playing better, right? I think the deck just fundamentally either works or it doesn't. And I think that, unfortunately, it does not work enough for me to feel like it is a good deck in the hands of good players compared to other decks. So I think when the deck does well, and this is like a deck I would really recommend to a newer player who knows how to play the game and is able to kind of commit to a singular strategy inflexibly and just do the same thing every single game, but is not confident in their ability to play well and under pressure, or to come up with the best strategy, or be flexible. I think this deck is great for that kind of player because you just execute the game plan every single game, and just as inflexibly as possible. And of course, you're going to lose the games that you were meant to lose, right? Like if you're out a bunch of climaxes, if your 1-1 Eins disappears into nowhere, if you don't have any goats or whatever, like you'll lose those games, right? But like you're going to lose those games no matter if you're a good player or a bad player, right? Like the deck just lost the game by itself, right? And like you could be the best player in the world and you would not be able to recover from a situation like that, right? And that's kind of the issue of the deck, is that like good players with good decks can make the deck better, right? But I think the player does not matter when it comes to the Overlord deck, right? The worst player in the world and the best player in the world will look the exact same playing the Overlord deck as long as they know like what the main game plan of that deck is. There's just not a lot of flexibility with the way the deck is built and designed, right? Like it's just very piece heavy. You just kind of, it's also very like the timing of everything is very heavy, like very precise. Like you just want to do the main game plan like very consistently. Yeah, I just don't think the deck's very good. And I think especially in the Western metagame, where a lot of players primarily favor aggressive early game strategies and doing a lot of damage early, I think that is kind of like the big weakness of Overlord, is that if it gets behind on its main strategy, it's very reliant on like making up for it in like a turn of mid-game cancels. But it doesn't have the tools to like guarantee those mid-game cancels while doing the main game plan. Like you're kind of like, if you're behind as the Overlord player, you're really hoping that on the turn that you marker 5 under Eins, you're going to double cancel on that turn, right? But the turn that you're marking 5 under Eins is the turn that you're not actually able to guarantee that your compression is very good going into the following turn. Like it's just, you're usually like kind of on a new deck, and your clock and level is like, it's whatever they hit you to, right? And so like you actually just have very little control over like how compressed your deck state is. And then if you eat a whole level there, you're just like, it's just so hard after that, I think. And then you kind of have to like hope that you double cancel or triple cancel at level 3. So I think again, the main game plan is very strong, right? On paper, I think the Overlord deck is strong, but it's very inflexible. It's very piece and combo heavy and reliant. And I think if anything goes wrong, no matter how good you are, you're not going to be able to fix a losing game, right? And that's just not how I feel like a tier 1 deck should be. I think compared to the other decks in tier 1, I feel like this deck is just definitively a step down. And so I will actually move it down to tier 2. And I don't even think it's at the top of tier 2. I'm just going to be completely honest here. I don't even think it's here. But I do think it's a good deck if you are not feeling confident in your own skill, because it's a deck that basically player skill, I'm not saying it doesn't make any difference, but like the amount of like plus or minus you get from player skill is very small compared to other decks. All right, and now let's go to the last deck in tier 1, which is 7 Deadly Sins. And I just think this is above and beyond the best deck in the format. I don't think it's even close. This deck just does everything you want a good aggressive deck in 2024 to do. Level 0 combo, a 2 soul trigger, a stock soul climax that pluses. You can plus up to 4 if you have all 4 copies on the board. You have the level 0 stock bomb Escanor that can like remove 2s and 3s if you set it up properly, which is not very hard to do. Your end game is fantastic, right? Kills very well at level 3. You just need to stick 1/3 plus 1/4, and your opponent's dead no matter where they are at level 3. Kills pretty reliably even in mid 2 because the damage numbers are so big. You just kind of have to stick 3 of like the 6 instances of damage, and if your opponent's not compressed, then like that can very easily happen. And then the icing, but it's like instead of just like a decorative icing, is like flooding the top of the cake, is Stock Swap Fumio. I've been asking for this specific combination of cards to get banned for months now. Stock Swap Fumio is just not okay. It's just completely unfair. Even at like 5 stock, which is like the normal cost of Stock Swap Fumio, or like 6 stock, sometimes Fumio is like pay 1 Fumio, right? They can do it for 4 stock for some reason. Like, what? Like, that's just not fair. There's just no world where that combination of cards should be allowed, right? And even without Stock Swap Fumio, I think this deck is still very strong, potentially even still tier 1. But because they have Stock Swap Fumio on top of everything else that they can do extremely, extremely well, I just think this is undisputed like the best deck in the format, and I think every other deck should be wary of this deck, and you either need to make sure you have something that can deal with what they're going to do, because they kind of play solitaire, right? They don't really care about any kind of matchup, right? Their cards are all just like, they just care about themselves. All they care about is having good compression so that they cancel and get that damage lead, and they have enough resources to just do the wombo combo at the end, the triple Hendrickson or the double Hendrickson stops off Fumio, and just no interaction, just nothing you can do about that, right? Which is why I do think that the Milim deck in this matchup is probably the best slime build, because the Milim will be able to kill the Elizabeth Brainstorms in the back row, and that does force them to not be able to just kind of like run away with the game. They actually have to play a little bit more conservatively, which can be a little tricky for the 7 Deadly Sins player. So that's why I do think this has an edge in that head-to-head matchup. But I don't know if it's like significant enough. I haven't seen that specific matchup play out very much. I just think 7 Deadly Sins is like by and far the best deck in the format right now. All right, and then I do agree with the cutoff there. I don't think any of the other decks in tier 2 kind of rise up to tier 1, at least not currently. I think there are some decks that have the potential to, but we just need to see in more testing. Speaking of which, I think the best deck in tier 2 is Caligura. I think this deck barely got hit, right? Obviously, Gura from 4 to 2 is significant. You lose half your Guras, but here's the thing. You could only ever play 3 Guras on the board. Like the 4th Gura was not doing anything, right? It's just extra consistency, right? And most of the time, you weren't even playing the 3rd Gura because that's 10 stock, and not like, I feel like 10 stock is like it's a reach, right? Like you don't always get to 10 stock every single game. Oftentimes you need to heal, brainstorm a lot more, or whatever. Like things happen. You don't go up to 10 stock. 8 stock I think is a lot more reasonable, especially with like the Kanda Hana stock. And so a lot of times most people were just aiming for double Gura plus like Kali or something, right? And so you still get that. You still get double Gura plus Kali. You can still get double Gura plus Aqua or whatever other off finisher you want to play. But now you just have to like kind of hold your Guras a little bit more closely to your chest, search them out earlier, salvage them earlier, which is like super easy. Like this deck just, like, you know, you have Mio. Like Mio just searches just on play and on death. You just get both Guras, right? You just kind of hold them for like the rest of the game. Like that's pretty chill, right? And then the rest of the deck is exactly the same as before, and they can play all the techs that Hololive gets to play, like just freaking anything you want. Like Hololive's even getting like even more support that also benefits this deck. So like, yeah, I think this deck, as long as people are willing to continue playing it, because I think Japan dropped this deck pretty quickly after the ban list, but I think Western players are more inclined to continue with this deck, especially since I do not think it is significantly weaker than before. And so because of that, I do expect this to do quite well. And yeah, we'll see. And then I think the next deck I'd probably put is Kanata Marin. And I think this deck still gets to do everything, right? I think Kanata combo is like performing Cold Fusion in Weiss. You just kind of like, you do your Kanata combo and then you can just go into whatever you want, right? You want to play Burn Event, you can play Burn Event. You want to play Marin, play Marin. You want to loop Boltons, you can loop Boltons. Now your opponent, if they left you with 1 card in their deck, then holy, now they have like 7 cards in their deck and they're just going to eat a full level and die, right? Like you can just do whatever you want after Kali, and like the world's your oyster, right? I think really good players who are dedicated like grinders of the Kanata Marin deck, they will still continue to see just as much success on this deck as before. It has not gotten any weaker, and I think only gets stronger as people are willing to play it and to get better on it. All right, I think the next deck, okay, honestly, a lot of these are really weak. I would say these are like closest to tier 1, and then there's like a bit of a drop off after these. So like probably 8 Standby is next. And then like I think 8 Standby Overlord are like kind of tied in like the next section. I think 8 Standby, it is obviously got hit. You can't play Mio and Luna in the same deck anymore. But there are definitely alternatives to Mio. Like you can just play the infinitely many other drop searches that Hololive has, right? You can play there's just other cards you can play. I think 8 Standby fundamentally is still very strong, especially since our top ends, if Slime is one of the best decks in the format, the top is not very strong, so your Luna is going to be very good into that. And you play very defensively, and it does really well into, I think, 7 Deadly Sins because you're playing a slower game, as long as you can compress and cancel. I think that kind of deck is, you're going to be well favored into like aggressive matchups. as long as you can build board and just consistently compress and stuff like that. I think having all the tools that Japan no longer has, like the polka bounce back and all that stuff, rest counter is just really important. I think the fact that English has all those tools still means that it is still quite a really strong deck. And I think around here is where I would drop Overlord. I think Overlord, I would not think that Overlord is stronger than any of these decks above it. Now let's see here. I don't have a lot to say about Quince, particularly because I'm not very familiar with how Nino is doing these days. Generally speaking, I feel like Nino has been the weakest of the three Quince, and Izuki being the strongest. I think Ichika has recently been doing well in like BSF tops. I think there was like a number of Ichikas. And I think the deck is really strong. I have that deck. I do think it's quite strong, but just nothing that I would be too excited about bringing into like a tournament. I think the deck kind of plays like the Overlord game. It's like this, except it's just like way more flexible outside of the main Overlord strategy, but like the ceiling is way lower, of course. I would think that Spy is probably better than all of these, right? I think pretty easily. I would play Spy over those decks for sure. Yeah. Also, just the fact that they don't have Stock Swap or Fumio. I'm gonna be real here. I think the lack of Stock Swap Fumio should just automatically disqualify a deck from tier 2. Right. Yeah, actually, you know what? Okay, I'm just going to say it right now. If your deck does not have an anti-compression tool like Stock Swap or Fumio, but specifically Stock Swap, I don't think Fumio is nearly as strong as Stock Swap. If your deck cannot Stock Swap, I don't think your deck is really worth considering in this current meta. I think Stock Swap is just so unbelievably strong, especially if you think about the best decks in the like that we're gonna see. 7 Innocence compresses super easily. Slime compresses super easily. Caligula compresses super easily. Contact compresses super easily. This deck compresses super easily. If you can't beat compression, you are not playing the game, right? And I just do not see any of these three decks being able to beat compression, especially when these decks can beat their compression if they get compressed. So you know what? I'm reacting to it, right? I straight up just do not think any Quince is in tier 2. Like I just if your deck does not have Stock Swap or Fumio, I do not think you should be considered in the top half of any kind of tiering in modern day Weiss. That's just not. It just does not make any sense to me, right? Like that's just. The name of the game is compression right now, and the best decks can compress really, really well. So, yeah. Spy does have a Fumio, so it's fine. I do think that probably Slime is better than Spy. I think the Fiona's like really good. It's like a very curb stomp deck. It wins really hard against decks that can't deal with its level 1s, but against decks that can deal with its level 1s, then it obviously like struggles mightily. This was on the tier list. It was Pants X, right? So between the choice and the Pants top end. So I'm gonna replace it. I do think Lloyd is better than Anya. I think Anya is probably closer to the bottom of tier 2. I don't think Anya is like tier 3 territory because like other decks of its nature, if it snowballs and gets away with it, it kind of runs away with the game. But I think it's definitely a lot harder to get away with it, especially if Overlord is going to be marginally more popular. I think Spy is going to struggle. Bochi. I do not think Bochi is very good, but it's probably better than Spy. I think Bochi is just more flexible than Spy. Oh, but this is probably Door, right? Oh, if this is a Door deck, no Door. If you're playing Door Bochi, that deck is bad. I just think that deck is super, super bad. But it's probably still no. If you're playing Door Bochi, it's probably tier 3. But if you're playing like Choice with the Rio, I think it's probably might be at the bottom of tier 2. It does have like the shuffleback Stock Swap, which is like it's fine, right? And I think Rio is Rio is like a really easy top end that you can kind of like just go into with like no questions asked really. But yeah, like that's about it. It doesn't really do anything unfair. So I don't know. I don't know. It's probably it's like fine. And then Ruby. This is 8 standby Ruby, right? I have not actually tested specifically 8 standby Ruby. I've only been playing choice standby Ruby. But even still, I think Ruby is so strong. So strong. I think this deck is crazy. Actually, you know what? I think this deck is better than Luna. I think if you're gonna play a standby deck in this current meta game, I think especially English, I think Ruby is just better than Hololive, right? Oh my gosh, dude! Like 8 standby Ruby specifically too, because you don't have to only play the Ruby and the Crow standbys. You can play Pura standby in some number, and like punish people in the same way that like Kanta Marine can punish people leaving like cards in their deck. You can use Pura to shuffle back 5 and just completely like ruin people. Is so good too. Like I think Ruby is crazy. And I think I personally prefer choice standby. I think these are pretty close, right? I think they have their own pros and cons. Obviously, like 8 standby Ruby, higher floor, right? 2/2s are really strong. Attack with 2/2 crows. You get your 3/2s on the board earlier, and if you have the Puras in memory early, then you can start clock kicking people earlier in the game, which is like that's really cool. And pretty strong, I think. But then you lack the ability to kind of sculpt your hand and get like really compressed in the mid game. Whereas the Jean is like, yeah, you can, the crazy, like the back row combo stuff, you get compressed really easily. Search all your cards you want. Choice is really good in Ruby because you can like salvage really good counters, like Crow refresh counter. But then I think it is a little more fragile. If your opponent doesn't give you reverse targets, it's going to be a little worse deck. So I think this one has a higher ceiling. This one has a higher floor. But pretty comparable. Honestly, like the new Ruby finisher stuff is insanely good. I think it's super strong, and I would not. Yeah, I think this is definitely a deck to watch out for. Especially if you're not comfortable playing against what Ruby has to offer. Their level 0 game has some like insane cards in it. You have to be wary about it and just know that it exists. All right, tier 2. So I do think Quinns are tier 2. We'll leave them at the top of tier 2 for now. I think Chainsaw Man is probably still tier 1. I would still play Chainsaw Man. Oh man, I'd probably still play Chainsaw Man over Spy. No, I think it's doable. Like, again, you can only play 3 Aki, right? Losing 2 Aki is not like the end of the world. Obviously, granted, Aki losing the third Aki is way more detrimental than losing the 3rd Gura. For obvious reasons, right? Like, it's pretty easy to triple Aki compared to like triple Gura. But you can still double Aki plus like an off finisher, like the power, for example. Like that's super doable. And like, easy revenge is still easy revenge. Scam is still scam. The rest of the deck is still really strong. With the level 0 combo. Maybe you still play Kishibe. Maybe you move off Kishibe to play a little bit more flexible of a game plan. But I think this deck is still really strong. I would be shocked if this just completely falls off the face of the meta. I would not drop this any lower really until it proves itself that it's not very good. What else? I think Gura is still tier. Standby Gura is still probably tier. Actually, wait, no, it's standby now. That's right. There's only 2 left. Never mind. I do not think that deck's very good. Rest of tier 3 looks fine. Guilty Gear. Until this deck does better, I do not expect it to. Yeah, I don't think it's very good. Is Escanor even playable still? I guess so. This deck seems fine. I think Shana is bad. I actually just... I need to see... Until it gets Dengeki, this deck just can't win, I think. It's not going to lose, but it's not going to win. So, like, eventually it's going to lose. I don't think this deck's very good. I think Mushoku is really strong. I have, like, very high opinion of Mushoku. I think I would rather play Mushoku than I would rather play Mushoku than any of the Quinns decks. Probably. I think 8 standby Mushoku is really good. It has a lot of really strong tools that I think it has a lot of really strong tools. You can kind of make the deck the way you want, right? You can play a lot of Pauls if you want to play the Paul game plan. You can play for like the stock swap Fumio game plan. You can play for like rest counter, primarily defensive game plan. You can splash green and play like the green package and stuff like that. I think this deck has like historically just been sleeper viable, right? Like every once in a while somebody's like woke up feeling like playing Mushoku, brings Mushoku to a tournament and like a major tournament, like a regional, and does well, right? Like this deck just like, it is never going to be a bad deck. I think this deck is definitely way more viable than like a lot of these other decks in this current meta. I think Azure Lane, hold up. There's no way Azure Lane is a worse deck. I think cats are just crazy, right? And this deck has a Fumio if it wants to play Fumio, although it usually doesn't play Fumio. Now I think cats easily just carries this deck, no? I think Azure Lane, both Azure Lane decks, cats are just so crazy. You just scam wins, right? Against any deck that's not prepared. Like Azure Lane into Ichika, like just think about this head to head. Like Azure Lane just wins, right? It's just so crazy that this deck can just play that insane level 0 game. There's no way. Yeah. These don't even have Fumio. This deck can play Fumio. Of course, this deck's crazy. Yeah. And then again, this deck has a stock swap. Better. This deck has a Fumio. I think it's better. This deck stock swap Fumio. Although you're playing Escanor, so I'm just gonna keep moving these Quince decks lower and lower. I have no respect for Quince, I think. Yeah, I just do not respect Quince. Okay. Bane Dream. Bane Dream has stock swap Fumio. But unfortunately, yeah, I think their finisher is just like really weak. And this needing a reverse obviously is not as bad anymore because Kishibe's out of the format. So you're probably more likely to get this reverse now than before. But like, yeah, the ceiling is just kind of mid. I think maybe people could consider like testing the Yukino finisher nowadays because we got the promo that makes it free. So I think that's slightly better, but like, yeah. I'm gonna move Shauna to the bottom. I actually just do not respect this deck at all. I don't think that deck can win. Data Live, okay. This sounds like I'm pandering to my own deck, but like I think this deck is crazy. Still, I don't think it's better than Azure Lane. I think it's better than Arifureta. Yeah, I would put this deck up here too. Especially now, like think about it. You lost Kishibe, which is like one of the worst matchups for this deck. When Kishibe comes out, like you can't get the reverses on the front row, so you have to back row the 1-0 Tokas. But now like level 1 game is a lot more fair, so you can like front row the 1-0 Tokas again at level 1. And then against the slime matchup, you have Trait Wipe, which really hurts that deck. And I think against 7 Deadly Sins, I don't think Trait Wipe does that much, but I don't think it stops the Hendrickson, but it does stop a few things, I think, in that deck. I just think this deck is just too goated, right? But against like Hololive, Trait Wipe does matter somewhat. And this deck, it gets really big at level 3, burn 3, Mocha 1, scam wins, yada yada. Pretty good. Review? Does Review have any? Oh, they have a stock swap, right? Okay, that's fine. They're fine then. Danmachi? Dude, when I saw Danmachi on this, I was like, who the heck is playing Danmachi still? I think AOT is not as bad. Like down here, I don't care. Like I don't know enough about some of these decks. Like I know Review's bad, right? It's not that bad, but it's like not great, right? I've played this deck. Like these decks just don't really matter. I think AOT's probably better than like a lot of these. I'd probably say AOT's at the top of tier 4 ish, right? They have a Fumio, which is fine. And then they have like some unfair cards like the 3/2 Armin, stuff like that. So I think that's probably good. Yeah, and then what I think this deck is not playable, probably. Losing Sokka just hurts so much. You just not only do you lose your finishing power, but you just lose a lot of your early game. I mean it's obviously playable, right? Like you can take it to locals or something like that, but I would not. I would probably take Shauna over Avatar at this point. I think this deck is just so rough. So rough. Okay. All right, and I think this is looking kind of more like what I would think in the tier list. So I mostly did rearranging within the tiers. I didn't try to shift it too much, because I want to talk about, I'm trying to talk about why people think they're strong, right? I think people think, like they consider these decks to be good, based off their personal experiences playing against the decks, based on like the ceiling of the decks. But I'm trying to talk about more of like why I think the decks are not actually that strong if I put them lower, or a lot stronger if I put them higher, right? I think there's like a few fundamental principles with this current season of Weiss, right? I think if you look at the best decks, even in the previous tier list, is that the best decks compress really well, right? And especially now that one of the biggest threats to compression is perceived to be weaker than before, it makes sense that the best decks are going to be able to compress extremely well. So if you don't have good tools to deal with compression, I just don't think your deck can tier very high. So to me, it is kind of ridiculous to think that Quince is going to do well in the upcoming season when this is like a compression season again. So it's like Quince is just not going to do well into compression, right? I think that's a pretty big problem, big issue for this deck. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you haven't seen the original tier list, go ahead and check Kilua's Twitter. The results are there. I'm sure there's like more information about how his process and all that stuff. You can ask him or whatever. And this is kind of my reaction to it. How I would like my thoughts about all the decks and their placements and where I would put them personally, and my read on the upcoming meta. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with my movements, my placings? Do you disagree? Why do you disagree? I'd love to strike up a bit of a dialogue, a conversation. And if you like this kind of content, let me know, and maybe I'll just do this for every upcoming community tier list. I do think this is kind of cool. The more I get invested into the English metagame, I feel like the better equipped I am at talking about this at length. And I think, yeah, hopefully this turned out well. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.